Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at using Prisma 2 as our ORM. In the last video, we used Sequelize, and we found there was a little bit of trouble setting it up with TypeScript. And there was just basically a lot of boilerplate code. With Prisma 2, things are much simpler, and I think Prisma 2 is pretty much brand new in the sense that it was in beta for a while, but I think now it's in regular release. But I'm pretty sure you're going to find it to be a powerful tool, and after this video, we won't be going back to Sequelize. We'll probably be using Prisma for the rest of the project. So if you go to their homepage, you can see that Prisma is self-described as a next generation ORM for Node.js and TypeScript, which means it's set up to be used with TypeScript. It's a TypeScript-based ORM, so we're not going to have the trouble that we had with Sequelize in getting things set up. All right. And if you take a look at their docs, they have two different ways you can get set up, right? You can add Prisma to an existing project, so let's try to do that first, and then we'll come back and do it from scratch. All right, so first, to set up Prisma, we're just going to need to install it, so let's do that. You can just copy this. All right, and once you install that, that includes the Prisma CLI, and if we run some different commands with the Prisma CLI, we can jumpstart our project. For example, we can do npx prisma init, and that'll give us a migrations folder, and it'll give us a Prisma schema, which is something we're going to need. So let's go ahead and copy this. All right, so you can see that we've got this Prisma folder here, and I said that we were going to get a migrations folder, but we won't get that until we actually run a migration. But we do have this Prisma schema, right? The file itself is in a folder called Prisma, and the file's name is schema.prisma. And again, we're using Postgres, so things are already configured for that usage. All right, we'll just need to add the schema. Also, you can see that a .env file was added to the project. All right, and it shows you how to add in your connection string variable values for your Postgres database, right? So you can just add in here your username, your password, and then the name of the database. So I'm going to pause the video and enter in my values, and you should do the same if you're following along. Okay, so if you've got your connection string all set up, let's go back over to the documentation. Actually, we were already there, sorry about that. So you can see down here, after they show you how to set up your connection string, they tell you that you can do introspection. So if you have an existing database, you already have some tables in there, then you can just use the introspection command to grab the information from your database and have a schema, a Prisma schema created for you. And all you need to do is run this command here, npx prisma introspect. So copy that. Let's run it. And boom, there's a schema. All right. Now this schema has our project model, our project assignment model, and our user model. All right, things are set up just a little bit differently here though. All right, so let's go through it piece by piece. Recall before, right, we had our project, it had an ID, which was an auto-incrementing integer, and that was the primary key. All right, so it's Prisma, this add ID means primary key. All right, we had a title, which was a string, and that is varchar 255, and you can get that just by adding @db. So for example, if I just type in @ here, I can get a lot of options. I choose db, I hit dot, and I get varchar, right? And I can add in 255. So the auto completion feature in Prisma is amazing. Also, if you remember, our status was a string. It was also a 255 character varchar string. Created at and updated at were both part of our models, although they were automatically included with Sequelize, as to where with Prisma we need to explicitly include them in our schema. All right. Now updated at, if you do the at mark thing and you get default, well, we don't want to use default. If you type in, say, u, it brings up updated at, so that gives you that type definition right there. Now before we said with our project we had an array of users, right? In this case, the way we're going to set up our Prisma schema, to get our many-to-many relationship set up, we're going to declare an array of users. This time we're going to call them members, as in project members. That's just a custom name. All right, but instead of using an array of projects, we're going to use an array of project assignments. Right, that's going to seem weird, but that's how we're going to relate our projects to our users. All right, so let's go down to the user model. All right, again, we have our ID, which was actually a UUID of type string. It was our primary key. That's what the add ID means. Name, string, email, which was unique and a string. So remember with Sequelize, we said unique is true, and that made Postgres set up our table in such a way that if somebody tried to add another user with the same email as an existing account, then it wouldn't work. And that's what this unique here does for us. It just makes Postgres set up the database that way. All right, our password was a string. Again, db.varchar. Created at, default now, updated at, we can do that again. At, updated at. Now our user has a list of projects. All right, so lowercase p, projects. And that won't be a list of projects themselves, it'll be a list of project assignments. Okay, so that takes care of our familiar project and user models. All right, and then with project assignment, created at, updated at, and our project ID. Before we had it with a large p. This time our database was set up a little bit differently, so it's giving us a lowercase p, so don't try to use your I think if you did introspection on your database with the database you created when we did Sequelize, you should have an uppercase P here, but I've added some different tables to my database in the interim, so that's why things look a little bit different. You can keep them uppercase if you like, but Prisma tends to make everything lowercase here, so I'm going to do the same. User ID as well is going to get the lowercase here. And we have to make sure that it knows we're making that a UUID here. And then for our foreign keys, right, we've got a relationship between a project, our project ID here, and the ID in the project model. And that's what this reference is right here. This is our foreign key setup. I'm just going to change this a little bit and make this a lowercase p project. And I'm going to do the same for user, just to be consistent. All right, and then once we run our migration, we're also going to automatically install our Prisma client. And our Prisma client is what we're going to use to run our queries, right? With Sequelize, we use Sequelize, for example, model.findAll. That allowed us to find all of the records in a table of a certain model. In this case, we're going to use Prisma to do that. So not Sequelize.model.findAll, but Prisma.model. And it's actually going to be find many. All right, so it looks like we've got our schema set up in the correct way. We didn't have to do much to it because with introspection, you get this automatically generated schema that matches your database perfectly. All right, but it's always good to go over it and make sure things look the way you want them to look before you do a migration. And don't forget here, this was our composite primary key for the project assignment relation table. All right, so again, we're using project ID and user ID. So if you've camel cased it up here, make sure you've done that down here as well. And over here and here as well. Okay, so we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and do a migration. So if you go back to the documentation, actually, and the only reason we're doing a migration here is because we've changed the schema a little bit. So let's move back, not to add an existing project, but to start from scratch. Right, and that gives you the migration command here. All right, since it's going to be our first migration, we'll be okay with the name init. It's the initial migration. So let's run this. It's probably going to give us a warning about losing data. You see that right here, all data will be lost, right? We're just going to drop everything and then recreate the tables. It's okay that we lose all the data. Remember, I have the those gists at my GitHub, so we can just go ahead and create a Cedar file and add that back. So go ahead and hit yes. All right, so now our database is synced up with our schema. And all right, we've generated our Prisma client, and our Prisma client is in sync with our schema so that we can call the models as we see them defined here. All right, so let's just go check our database real quick. All right, so if I refresh, I still have the tables, but now, for example, in the user table, all of the data is gone. All right, likewise for projects and project assignments. Also note that with Sequelize, if we created a model with a singular name like project, it pluralized it to be projects, but Prisma doesn't do that, so be aware of that. Also, we have this migrations table, and that keeps track of our migrations, and that's going to be useful in production. All right, good. So let's go ahead and seed our database so we can get our data back. So if you recall at my GitHub, I have that gist. It's called ts-gql-5-data.ts. So if you open that up, get the raw code and copy it all. We can create, oh, and by the way, you don't need this database folder anymore, and because we're not hooking up to Sequelize anymore, so just go ahead and get rid of that. Add a file to the root, sorry, not a file, but a folder called, just call it data. Why not? And then in that folder, create a file, and we'll call it seed.ts. And then just paste everything from the gist in there. All right, good. So the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to add our users. So before we were using our utilities file to do that's where we added a lot of our logic in. All right, so go ahead and comment all this out, or delete it if you want. We're not going to use it again. I just somehow I'm holding on to it for sentimental reasons, I guess. All right, good. So first thing we'll need to do is what shall we do? All right, we'll import our users. So Okay, and if you go back to the documentation, they give you this little skeleton for running your queries, right? And using the Prisma client. So it's right here. So just copy that. And add it. That I did not want to do. I don't know why I did that. Good. All right, so we brought in our Prisma client. We can use that now. And we'll write our query right here. Okay, so again, we're not using Sequelize, but we can still use basically the same structure. It's just rather than using db.model. Whatever the query is, we use Prisma. Right. Dot model, which in this case is user. Autocomplete is doing us a treat. And then we're going to do create many. All right, even though we only have 2 records, it's still more than 1. All right, and inside here, open up a set of curly braces. And for us, we'll need to add a field in Prisma. I mean, you need to add a field called data. All right, and then we can add our users array. Okay, and that will add all of our users from the list. And then we can make sure that we're getting those users by querying the database immediately afterward. And it's not find all, but find many. And we can just grab the data as it is. All right, so this file is utils.ts. It's in the source folder, so we can run it. All right, that should be okay. Good. And here's our data right here. All right, so you can see that we are not getting any information about projects. We're just getting the basic user data here. Okay, but we'll get there. This just shows us that we've got our data in the database. We've got these new records added, so let's go take a look. All right, users, view, edit, data, all rows. And here we go, we've got our 3 users back. Okay, so let's add the projects. All right, so remember we're just exporting an array called projects. So in our utils.ts file, we can bring those in. All right, and just change our create many function to use the project model. Typed in just P in the autocomplete, brought it right up for me. Again, Prisma is really good with that. And I hope you can appreciate how fast we're up and running with Prisma and how quickly we're able to start making queries against our database. All right, so in this case, it wouldn't be all users, but all projects. Make sure our model is correct. Okay, so let's run that command again. All right, and looks like we were able to add those projects as well. And we're not going to go back into the database and see. We should trust that they were added correctly. Well, we'll actually need to go back to the database because, as you remember, in our seed, for adding assignments, we needed to add the existing user's ID, which is a UUID. So go back to your database and say for our first user, who is Octavio, we'll grab his UUID, copy. All right, we'll add Octavio, or we'll assign him project number 1 and also project number 2. But we also want to add Farah to project number 1. So let's go back All right, good. So should be good to go there. Let's add these assignments. All right, now, if you remember, the name of the model, and we can go back and look at our schema again, was project assignment, right? So if we go to, or if we try to add in our model name here, we add in P, we see project assignment comes up and it's lowercased here. All right, is that okay? Let's go back to our schema just to make sure. All right, well, for some reason, Prisma likes to camel case these model names. All right, so it should be okay though, so let's use that. All right, and then for our data will be assignments. All right, but now we're getting an error. So it says that basically our data type is not matching up with what our schema has. Okay, so if you see here, it says that type project ID number user ID string is missing the following properties from type project assignment create many input, and it has lowercase values here. So remember, we changed things in our schema, but we didn't change them in our seed value. So here we should make these camel cased. Makes you wonder why I even bother doing this in the first place, but I just wanted to be consistent since Prisma uses a camel case naming convention. Alright, so it looks like our error went away. We should be good to add these assignments, so let's go ahead and do that. Looks like the assignments are added. Good. Alright, so Prisma, just like Sequelize, allows us to write a sort of minimal query that uses table joins to give us exactly the data we want. All right, so if we go back to the documentation, and before we do that, let's go ahead and comment this out and then get rid of all of this. All right, so go back to the documentation. All right, and what they did was they added a single user, and then they have a query to include values for that user. And actually, I want to use something a little bit different here because we're dealing with a many-to-many relationship, and in this example, they were dealing with a one-to-many relationship, right? A user has many posts, but a post doesn't have many users. So, and I'll include this link in the description below the video. There's a part of the Prisma docs that includes information on modeling and querying many-to-many relations, which actually wasn't easy to figure out compared to Sequelize. So that was the one thing about Prisma that gave me a bit of trouble. All right, so if you go down, they talk about explicit relations. All right, and they create a value, and then they show you a query. So grab this. All right, and we'll put that right here. Change our model value. We're looking up users. So that's just user. Okay, now we're going to include, and then we want to include what? Not tags, of course. For a user, we want to include projects. Now, sorry, here they are, projects. Right, that's what we want to include. So change this to projects. All right, and then we want to include for the projects, and remember what projects are according to our schema. According to our schema, projects are, or is this projects here is a list of project assignments, or an array of project assignments. And inside of a project assignment, we can get an individual project. So we need to select this out of our project assignment model. So if you go back here, we're going to include project. All right, so we include all of the project assignments, and then we include the project as well. So we're doing a sort of inner join here. We're getting that project table connected to the junction table, which was project assignments, and then attaching that to user. So again, that's a lot of talking. So let's just go ahead and do this. And sorry, we should define a variable value here. Let's call this result. Okay, let's run this query. And so you get a lot of data, right? And you get that because for each user, say for Octavio, right, you're getting his ID, of course, name, email, password, the timestamps. Now you've got his list of projects, but that's going to include information from both the project assignments table and the project table. So, right, so we're getting timestamps for the project assignment. We're getting a project ID, user ID. These come from the project assignment table. And then we're going to go for the individual project, and this comes from the project table. We get the project ID, the project title, and the status. Right, so in this case, we're getting the project ID once, twice, and well, that's enough, isn't it? I mean, twice is still too much. We're also getting the user ID twice. So what we can do to streamline our query, and you can borrow a little bit of code from the documentation. So go back. Right, underneath that query that they gave us here, they gave us a little function that maps over that result and gives us specifically only the project information and no information from the project assignments table. So right above your console log, you can add that in. All right, so we don't want to use result twice. We'll call this all users. Now the thing we're mapping over here is this result right here. So you just type in result. And then we're saying for each user, all right, we're adding in the usual user values, everything that's defined in the schema model, right? And then for all the projects, which are project assignments, we're mapping over the user projects. And then for each assignment, we want only the project. Okay, so no errors, so this should be good. Again, I know this seems a little bit difficult to follow, and if you're new to Prisma, it's a little bit tricky to get used to how they set things up, but it's a very nice streamlined query. So basically, you're getting this huge big response right here. And this is only for 3 users. Right? And then you're mapping over that response, and then for each user, right, you're getting their basic user values, and then you're also getting that list of project assignments. But since we don't want all of the data from the project assignment table, we're mapping over that list of project assignments and then just grabbing out for each individual assignment the project information, right, which comes from the project table, right? And that's what we need to return to our GraphQL endpoint through our resolver. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. All right, so you can see here we've got, for Octavia, we've got his ID, his name, sorry about that, his email, his password, the timestamps. Then we get to projects, and only for the projects, all we have for each project is the project ID, the title, and the site upgrade, or sorry, the status, the timestamps, and then we're on to the next project. We don't get all that extra information from the project assignment table. All right, so you get a nice streamlined query, and this will work exactly with our GraphQL endpoint. So what we can do is, rather than use all of this stuff here, and since this is a GraphQL project, you don't need to be disconnecting your Prisma client every time like they had it set up to do. All right, let's create a function called getUsers and export it. Take this bit of logic here, paste it in. All right, we don't need to console log it, but we need to return it. All right, and then our resolvers file should be good if you go back and look at it. All right, we're just importing the getUsers function, right? And we hover over it and we see we're getting what we need to get. Right? At least we know that the type is correct. And then we're just returning that through our GraphQL endpoint. So if we run our dev server, we should be able to go to our playground and make a successful query that gives us our basic user information like ID, name, email address, and then also the list of projects with all of the relevant field values there. So let's go ahead and run our dev server. All right, so probably we forgot to take care of our connection here. So first of all, to fix this, we can probably just change our schema to a TypeScript file. All right. Let's go into our index.ts file. All right, so this is a bunch of stuff that we're not using anymore, so you can get rid of that. Won't need any of this. All right. So recall in the last video we were doing Sequelize.sync here and using our models to create our tables. We're not doing that anymore because we're now using Prisma. All right, so let's go ahead and run our dev server, or attempt to, one more time. All right, so let's go to our playground. All right, and just clear that out and we'll start from scratch. All right, so we'll need the ID, name, email, password. No way, you don't want to return that. What are you doing? All right, projects. All right, now projects, each of them have an ID, a title, and the status. All right, so hopefully this will give us our response, the response that we need. So let's run it, and boom, we got it. All right, so again, for each user, we get an ID, a name, an email, and a list of projects, and that's for Octavio, he has 2. And then for Farah, she has just the 1 project. And then for Peter, who we said was on vacation, extended vacation, he's got no projects. He's probably on a nice tropical beach somewhere enjoying his time. All right, so that's it. That's how you work with Prisma in a simple GraphQL project like the one we have. It's very easy, it's very powerful. Like I said, if you already have an existing database, you can just introspect it and automatically generate your schema, right? But if you don't have a database and you're starting from scratch, that's no problem, right? All you need to do is set up your schema here. Now this takes a little bit of time, right? Because you need to get used to how Prisma uses schemas, especially for a many-to-many relationship like the one we have here between project and user. All right, so I've actually made a video on doing many-to-many relationships with Prisma, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below the video, so that way you can see how to set up a Prisma schema from scratch. But anyway, we're going to be using Prisma going forward with this project, so I hope that you can appreciate the power of Prisma 2 basically. And I think we're all going to be early adopters of it, and maybe we're really onto something good, something that's going to really change things going forward, and maybe in a similar way to the way GraphQL changed things. Anyway, thank you for joining me as always, and I'll see you next time.